so on to the mushroom table. Um, as I mentioned, so this is submitted by Felix Mitchell. These are going to be a little bit drab, and you'll see the beginning here. There's kind of a theme. So this is kind of your little brown mushroom growing on a log, and you flip it over and you say, okay, we just saw some summer ones that are similar to this. This is a different species. Some people may call this the winter oyster. This is more the classic oyster. The gills didn't really form very well, probably because it was cold. But this is, with these decurrent gills, this is an oyster mushroom. In fact, I don't know if it was a different place, but a couple of weeks later, he sent me this photo, which is also a cluster of oysters. So Plurotus Ostriatus, again, okay, move on, Asher. Plurotus Ostriatus, these are your oyster mushrooms. This is submitted by Jennifer Pock. I guess you kind of see these look pretty similar, don't they? These are a little bit younger, a little fresher. Still that dark color. These tend to be a little bit more dense when in the winter, in the colder season. A lot of people say that these are more substantial and have more flavor too than some of the summer oysters. But yes, these are also Plurotus Ostriatus, your oyster mushrooms. And what do you know? Somebody else sent in a different picture. Now these, you'll see, are growing from the ground. Well, this is probably just growing from the roots that are still buried under the ground. I'm guessing either this tree is dead or dying. And so they're just emerging from the ground, but this is another big cluster of oyster mushrooms. They tend to like it when it gets a little cold. This, it warms up a little bit and they'll pop out pretty quick. So here's another. This is submitted by Jennifer Pock. She found this at Patuxent Wildlife Refuge. So this is kind of one of those polypores. Looks a bit like a turkey tail, maybe. You flip it over and you say, hey, okay. Well, this has got those pseudo gills, So I've left I put the top back on here. It's got this zonation, but once you see these gills, this is going to be Linzites betulina, the multicolored gilled polypore. And you say, hey, well, there's not many colors in this, and this is probably just because it's faded. It's probably been out for a while. It might have had some purples and yellows and oranges. When you find these in the summer, they can be quite colorful. It can be a little fuzzy too. All right, so this one was submitted by Jeremy George. He didn't include any closer pictures of some of these polypores. This down here might actually be an oyster mushroom, I'm not sure. But he was focusing on this little guy right in here. And I know you probably can't really see it, but this is what it looked like. It's dried up. It's really hard to say. I told him I would call that an LBM or a little brown mushroom. It might be a Gallerina, but it's hard to see the lighting if there is any kind of ring zone. But one thing that is kind of cool is that he took some pictures of the spores. So he said he got these with oil immersion. I have a rudimentary knowledge of spores, spore shape, and things of this nature. I did Google Gallerina spores just to see, and they do have this general shape, but it said they can be a bit warty, and that may have to do with maybe the reagents he's using. So if he probably just mounted this in oil with no kind of chemical, something like a Meltzer's reagent, which could help to highlight some of the ornamentation on the spores. Anyway, I thought that was kind of cool that he's, delving into trying out microscopy. I tend to be more macroscopic myself. So LBM, little brown mushroom. All right, and this one was also submitted by Jeremy George. You saw some of these earlier in William's talk. These are common, fairly common in the winter months. They do like it when it's cold, although I've been seeing them, you know, sometimes you'll see them in the spring when it's still kind of cold, but I think a couple people found them in the summer this year, which seems kind of weird to me. You can see this one's getting old and shaggy. You can see why they'd call it the bearded tooth when you look at this picture. But this is Hericium erinaceus. This is the lion's mane, bearded hedgehog. There's a whole lot of names for this one, common names. And the last few here were submitted by Shiva Devkota, actually from Nepal. I thought that was kind of cool that he was, he said he went out post-monsoon. So these are a little bit after, you know, the rains and things have started drying up. And I might be able to give a little bit of direction, but I'm certainly not going to be able to call anything on these. So the first here, I've actually seen this here, and I think this is just a common Plurotus. It grew, it dried up, and you can see it had gills which have dried up. It's got some other molds growing on it, but I think I've seen some old oysters that actually looked like this when they got dried up. So that may be what this is. We've got a polypore here. So you guys, if you recall last month, you've got zonation going on here. You've got, I've kind of zoomed in here. It's got some pores growing on wood. I bet there's tons of little things like this growing on this wood pile here. I told him that's probably something in the Trametes genus, but I'm not certain. But if I found that here, I would think to look for in the Trametes genus to begin with. Anyway, moving on, here's an actual nice fleshy fungi here. A few features to look at. You've got this discoloration on the cap. This is due to the spores being produced. I'm not sure what color the gills were when they first started, but I zoomed in here and you can see this mottling. This is a very classic sign in a couple of different mushrooms, but one, in fact, they both have dark spores, but one that I know of that's a little bit larger in stature and not teeny is Safarella. And so here you might find something like Safarella candoliana. They also tend to have kind of these white edges on the gills and this mottling. So this is very classic of that genus. So I would suggest if you to start with a Safarella to see if I'm judging that it has dark spores. If I didn't make that clear. Just by the coloration of the gills. Now you can't always make that decision, you know, like you might see a mushroom that has orange gills, and when you do a spore print, it's going to be like white. So you can't always judge the spore color just from the gills, but sometimes they'll give you clues. Something like a Cortinarius, where, you know, it's got this rusty color, and then you'll also see it dropping onto the web cortina left on the stipe there. Anyway, so I suggested that this might be something in the Safarella. Anyway, that's all we have for today. Thanks everybody for the submissions. I'm still taking submissions, so if you do see something, send it along, and I'll see if I can put it in here.